welcome to everybody. Very excited to be here. Thank you all for coming. It's actually quite funny because I come from Ede. This is my birthplace, and I lived here the first 19 years of my life. And I remember as a little girl going to the cinema, and back in the days we had this guy, before the beginning or the start of a movie, he would come down and this guy would tell something about the movie and the trailers that we were going to see. And I always found it so cool that he was standing in front of so many chairs and doing this interaction with the public, and now look at me. So I will tell you a little bit about the movie that you are going to see tonight or today. We are going to talk about the co-creation between UX and software development. And just to get a little impression, who of you identifies as a software developer? Please raise your hands. Okay, nice. I'm not sure if you have so much left.
Now, I'm very interested, who of you identifies themselves as a designer?
Hey, nice. Well, good
Thank
that you're
you.
here. Nice. not fully blown away by all the software developers. Okay, cool. And then I'm also interested, like, how many of you are already working together with the different disciplines? Like, if you're a software developer, are you already working with a designer? If you're a designer, are you already working closely together with a software developer? Please raise your hand. Okay, 50%, I think.
That's good, yeah. And then for the rest, who of you would love to work closer together?
Well, I hope
Okay,
they
that's
do.
good, that's good.
Otherwise, this is the time to leave, I guess. But,
You've come to the right
maybe we
talk.
can convince them, if not. All right, now that we know a little bit more about you, let's tell a little bit more about ourselves. This is Thamar. Thamar is the Global Director User Experience Design of Adidas. Well, that's a whole mouthful. And she loves everything that is sport related. She's actually currently training for her 5th Dan, which is like a very high level in karate. So that is very impressive. And when it comes down to work, she's very motivated by simplifying things because she believes that people are not stupid, but that things are just not really designed the way that people expect it to. So with that in mind, and the motto of Adidas, impossible is nothing, here is Thamar.
Thank you, Simone. Wow, what an introduction. So next to me is Simone, and she actually started out her career, she studied to become a speech therapist. That's a bit different than becoming a developer. And while she was practicing that, she noticed that she loves to solve problems and look into solutions, but being a therapist was not that much her thing. Eventually, she ended up doing a traineeship to become a developer, and that worked out pretty great because now she's one of the stars of Open Value Amsterdam. So I'm very privileged to stay on stage with you today.
You.
And today we're going to look into co-creation. How can you co-create together? What kind of team does it take? Which teams do co-create, and where do you co-create only with developers or only with designers? And when do you step into and work together? So we look into the process, how that process can look like, and then we go into the details of that part of the process and how you can best collaborate.
Yeah, awesome. But before we really dive in, I can imagine that you're wondering, why are we here? Maybe you're even wondering, why am I here? And to give you a little bit more purpose and direction in the upcoming 15 minutes, let me clarify that a bit for you. So we actually came together because of a podcast. We were both asked individually to talk about the role that user experience plays for us in our day-to-day work from different angles, so from design or software development. And there we really found our common passion that we really love to collaborate, and because we really see in practice that our products are so much better and more fitting whenever we start working together. So that is why we are here, to also give that back to you. And you can compare it a little bit with a painter. So in this example, we have a painter and he gets an assignment from a middleman, and the middleman tells him, can you please make a forest for one of my customers? So, sure, I can do that. He starts painting and he starts creating this beautiful forest. It's actually one of the best drawings he's ever made. So he gets back, he's very proud, right? Like, hey, look at this amazing painting. But unfortunately, the customer is not happy at all. The customer is more of an artistic kind of person, and he would love to have had something like this. Not so concrete. And actually, the customer wanted to hang the painting outside in the garden, but because the painter didn't know that, he drew the painting with watercoloring. So it only takes one rain before that painting would be completely destroyed. Now, how did this happen? Two things are happening in the story where the painter can be represented as the software developer. He didn't know his customer. He didn't know the needs and the preferences of the user, so he couldn't anticipate on that. And secondly, the middleman didn't know about all the specific, the toolkit that a painter has to his day-to-day job toolkit sets. This is not a very nice sentence. But yeah. But because the middleman didn't know about that, he never gave the information that the painter needed in order to create the right product. So there are certain gaps that weren't even visible because they didn't talk together. So we are here because we believe that when we start working together, we see the gaps. And it's okay that we have gaps. That makes sense because every specialty has its own goal. But when we start working together, we can see it and we can draw it in. And that's what you're going to listen to.
Yes.
Now I can imagine that all of you are sitting here like, okay, that's very nice and dandy. We have had a lot of managers talking about this and saying, yeah, you should definitely work closer together. But you might have some obligations to that.
Yeah, and these are some of the quotes that we have heard. And the first one is, but we already have too many meetings.
They don't get us.
I can't guarantee the quality of my work if I need to do 100 things at the same time.
Will I now also be responsible of the design?
Well, we have roles for reasons, right? So does everybody need to own the same skill set?
I just tune out when they start talking about their part of the process.
And here's the best one. I don't get paid to do this work.
Nice. And although these are very valid concerns, because we don't want to say that they don't exist, we think they very much do exist. But we want to go over them and see how we can tackle them and hopefully get them out of the way.
Yeah, so the first thing you can look at is how you compose a team. So you cannot just put people together and expect it to work. So what I always look at as a team lead is say, okay, what type of project? That's one of the things in this triangle. What type of project is it? And who would best fit that type of project? Then you look at the personality of that person, so the mindsets, but also their values. And, you know, does that work well together? And are we creating something that is working according to my values? I can give you a very honest example. I didn't want to work on the World Cup for Qatar. It's not according to my values, so they shouldn't put me on it. But someone who really loves football and is not that much into the politics, that person can work on it, that's fine. And it's also good to say that, so that you work on the things that you believe in. And then, of course, you look at the skill set. So the skill set can be developer, designer, maybe motion designer, maybe, you know, different types of codes and language, you name it. So this is what we always look at for a team. And once that team gets together, you need to get to know each other and understand each other's skill set and mindset and values. And then what you can do is say, okay, what is our team purpose? What are we actually gonna build and why are we gonna build it? From the keynote from this morning, we also heard the 3 whys. And that's also something we strongly believed in when we started talking about it. Why am I better at producing or showing results in one project compared to the other one?
It's also funny now that we have been talking about this a lot, right, in preparation of this talk and stuff. And I look at like job interviews or so much different because when hiring, this also plays a great part. You are not necessarily okay, you might look for a skill, but you really also want someone to envision your purpose. So instead of only focusing on the skill set, for me, it really speaks whenever I see a job that says like, okay, are you passionate about this? Are you getting excited to solve this kind of issues?
Yeah, definitely. And I also want to use this quote. It's from Simon Sinek. He also wrote the book on understanding the why. And he says, people don't buy into what you do, but they buy why you do it. And what you do simply proves on what you believe in. And this is the same in teamwork. If you believe in what you do and you believe in that you need to do this together, then it can work. But if you only focus on the what, like I need to deliver this before 4 o'clock in the afternoon and then I go home again, the results will be far different.
All right, with that being said, let's get a little more practical. Because how can we support that kind of vision? How can we make sure that the purpose is team leading? And then we get to team structures, because a team structure is not a one-size-fits-all. On the internet, you can find 100 different kinds of team structures. We're going to get through 4, which we think is most fitting for this talk. So stay with us. The first one being an operation team. It's a team that is really responsible for getting everything in the company up and running, like infra, network, those kind of stuff. And although you are serving someone, like probably the teams within that company, and although you are very important for the end user, you probably don't have a UI, right? Like you don't really have a user interface. So in this sense, with this team, it's a great example that we don't say that having a designer in your team or a collaboration is always the holy grail. Sometimes it just doesn't make sense with your purpose. Where it does make a lot of sense is process teams. Process teams are teams that have the responsibility for an entire business process, so an end-to-end user flow. And most of the time, as you can see in the picture, you see some developers with their laptops and some designers working closely together, most of the time within one team. And they are creating the whole process, so they also need to know about why they are creating it, all of them. It's not like an isolated team structure. Now, it can also, you can actually give an example from Adidas, right?
Yeah, so this is an example from Adidas. For instance, the checkout. So we have teams who focus on the checkout process. There you have designers and developers working together to make sure we offer the right delivery methods, payments methods, and it all runs smoothly. So they're consistently working together on optimizing this process.
Yeah, nice. So sometimes when a company gets a little bit bigger, you want to have more similarities among different teams, right? You don't want to have a user experience where a user faces a chat box that looks like A and completely different on a different part of the application. So you want to have the same look and feel and the same functionalities. This is where feature teams most of the time come in. So feature teams are dedicated teams that have the responsibility of one or more features. They know everything about that feature. And that feature can participate in multiple user flows. So as you can see, on top you have a designer team, and the designer team is in charge of all the user flows. They look at the user flows, they see, okay, we now need a basket, we now need a chat box, we now need some pictures or a search engine, and they go to the different teams in order to get that. Now, we do think that the best approach is to get one designer per team that is dedicated to that team. Doesn't mean, like with the last slide, that that developer is doing all the work for that team. It's just a person that knows about the being of the team and can take that back to the design team in order to dedicate the work.
Yeah, and one of the examples from Adidas is actually the team that I work in that's called digital retail. So we have a lot of digital touch points within our retail stores. And we have a small team designing all of them so that the journey runs smoothly, that if you visit a store, you get kind of the same journey and the same fluidity into your store experience. So it can be you use your app to request a product, or it can be that you step into a fitting room and there we have a smart mirror where you can request a different size without going outside. You can just request it from that smart mirror, and then the employee gets a notification, all right, that person in fitting room 5 wants a size M to try on of this shirt. And that person gets it, says that he's on his way, you get a notification in your fitting room, you name it. So that is really a journey that we are designing, and then we are designing those different touch points and working with different feature teams to develop that. And then a lot of times one of the designer is that single point of contact for instance, the smart mirror developers.
Cool. All right, last but not least, the project teams. It's a little bit more in the middle of the process team, and the feature team is a temporary team, unlike the other ones, which were more permanent. This team is making something on short notice. It's also most of the time not responsible for maintaining it once it goes to production. So it's a temporary team, and you can decide based on the purpose if you want to have the designer really in the team or only have contact with that single point of the team that you're delivering for. What is very important is that you are delivering for another team. So I'm not sure how many of you have had this experience, but it sucks when you have worked on a product and then it gets to the other team to actually put into production, and they are throwing it away because they don't get it, it's not the right fit, it's already outdated, you name it. The other way around, it works the same way. If you're actually in that team and you get a product that's shitty, that sucks as well, right? So keep having that conversation over and over. So, little summary. This is what we just talked about, just leaving it here. And let's move on to the process.
Yes, so once you've established what kind of team you're working in and how you can best work together also with other teams, we want to give you some examples of processes that you can use. And these are examples that are well known in the industry. So we always look from, of course, the business lens, because you work according to your company value, mission, statements, you name it. And then the design process in a lot of companies look the same. You really want to understand first, empathize, and then you materialize, then you really go into designing the prototypes and validating that. And once you've validated it and you know you're on the right track, then you go actually into more development cycle.
Yeah. Well, please raise your hands. Who has seen this beautiful loop? Okay, nice. All right. Well, we can move on. No, it's of course it's super well known. It's a DevOps cycle. We start with planning, we build it, we put it in production, we kind of maintain it and monitor it, and then we plan again. So both very nice models, right?
Both circles. So
both circles.
Let's get creative and
let's do
create a design dev ops model.
Ta-da!
Here we go.
Can I get an applause for our beautiful model? Nice.
Yes, so if we look at this, we started talking about, hey, we can actually combine these circles. In the middle, you have the planning, right? Because you need to know from each other what the plan is and when you're working on this. And then it's the other way around.
Oh, hey, nice.
All right. So then you go into the design circle. That's the first one. You empathize, you define, you ideate, and then you prototype and you validate. Then you go into the dev cycle that you've seen, and then into the ops cycle. So we talked about where can we co-create here. And that's on the next slide. So what you will see, of course, everybody can empathize with the user, but you usually see that it is the UX team that does the research, that looks into, talks to the consumers, you name it. Or it's actually someone from the business coming with some kind of business report and saying, hey, we know this is a niche in the market, let's do this. So you empathize, and then you define, and then you get your design direction. And once that design direction is there and you want to know what you actually want to create, then you can ideate together. Maybe some people have heard of design sprints where you really sit together and brainstorm together. I find that very, very helpful, because then you don't only look at it from a business or a consumer perspective, but you also look at it from more the development perspective. Then you prototype, and a lot of times I see designers creating their own prototypes. But if you really work together and you know already during ideation what you actually had voted on the most and what you want to try out, I've had experiences where a developer could build a prototype in 1 or 2 hours, which would take me 2 days. So again, you know, talk together, see where you can help the designer and the other way around, and make that prototype.
It's funny because last week I had a conversation with my team on something process related, and in our team we do spikes quite often, so kind of trying out new stuff before really deciding if you want to spend a lot of time in it and make it production ready. So those spikes is something we work on, and we were looking actually at like our Confluence structure. So how do we want to order documentation and stuff? And then the designers in our team said like, oh yeah, but the spike is really tech, right? Like the spike is not design related. And it was like, that's actually like the prototype part. That is actually your cycle. We're just like jumping in, but this is actually the prototype, I think, phase. I kind of would map it there.
Yeah, can definitely be. Yeah, yeah. And then it's good to work together on that one, to not also not waste valuable time. And then validating. This is when we talk to our consumers or our end users. And then it's always interesting to at least watch the highlights. So a lot of times we can record it, not always, but sometimes we can record it. Then it's good to at least watch the highlights, because that will create an idea of how the consumer really thinks, and it might even spike more ideas with you, or different type of solutions. So there we highly encourage, come and watch, join us when we go to the retail store, or
really see your customer,
really
right?
see your customer and identify with them. And then you go into the plan phase, and the plan phase might be, hey, go back into the ideation phase because we validated it doesn't work. But if you're lucky, at one point you will go into the development cycle.
Yes, most definitely. Yeah, so we go a little bit more in depth in a second. But what I think is really important here to mention is one of the concerns that we just stated, namely, what about responsibilities? Like, we already have a lot of tasks and a lot of like balls we need to keep in the air. Are we just getting more work in the same amount of time? We think that with this model, you are like, the end result is the responsibility of the team. Everybody that plays part in this cycle has a responsibility of what they deliver. However, the different parts within that cycle most definitely have individual responsibilities. And you still have a role to play to give feedback, right? You still need to check each other's work in order to maintain that end responsibility of the entire product. However, you also need to trust your team members and need to trust on their speciality and on their toolkit.
Yeah, because eventually you're all working towards that same purpose.
Yes.
All right.
Let's dive in.
Let's dive in to some of the tools that we are using. And when we started talking about it, it's interesting to see how we could learn more from each other when we're using those tools. So the first part that we're going into is the design cycle. Of course, we do a lot of user research, but we also look at a lot of the data. So that's where the monitoring part comes in from the ops cycle again, because you want to learn from your data. And then one of the things that we do is create journey maps. So you really map out the journey of your user. And I want to dive into that a bit more.
Who has ever seen a journey map looking like that thingy a little bit?
Good,
Okay, few.
good. Yeah, nice. All right, let's dive into the journey map. So usually we go around from a persona or user profile to really identify with the user. And you have a certain scenario on, okay, this, for instance, this user is gonna do a click and collect order online. And then you divide that into different phases. So they go online, they search for the product, they find the product, and they order it, go through checkout. But then they also, of course, you know, at one point need to pick it up in the store. So this can be a very long journey. You define the user actions, but you also look into what is currently the emotions of a user when they're doing that. And that comes out of our user research. And then you can see what are actually the pain points and also what are the delighters. Because the pain points you want to fix, but the delighters you want to keep or even increase so that the emotions even go higher, the happy emotions. And then from those points, you can map out your opportunities. So let's map out those opportunities. Here you see an opportunity map. And what we do is we say, okay, what is the effort versus the value? And this is when we started talking. I can see what the user value is. I can see what the business value is because I talk to the counterpart of business. Well, what we see in multiple companies is that then the business and the designer kind of also think around how much effort it is. And it's where it goes wrong, right?
Yeah, I think it's quite annoying for developers a lot of time because we are kind of, we get out of the loop, like we are kept out of the loop, and then a PO comes up like, okay, we have this map. Like, how did you know about the effort? Or like, unless you have a very technical PO, of course, that can be. But a lot of time there is no collaboration, and maybe you even get like a user story already to your plate with already a thought out decision, already a thought out roadmap on how to implement that and which solution direction it should go into. Whereas if we already are working together on this point, we are more involved in the why because we get an idea of the different opportunities that lay around. So we see it more as a whole. And secondly, I think because we know our code base, we can get so much more, like a so much more correct effort scale in comparison if it would just have been done by a designer. Because how many times did we have a little change where a designer said, I have this very difficult problem. And then it was like, oh no, like I can fix that in half a day. It's fine. Or the other way around, like, oh, I have this massive problem. Or the other, so. Or I have this very tiny problem. I'm like, okay, yeah, that would definitely take a month to fix.
I had that quite often, yes.
Nice.
So the first thing that we're gonna start with most of the time is high value, low effort, right? That's what we wanna do as a team. And we started talking about, okay, what are the next steps then? And this was also a really nice one that Simone saw, event storming on how to do that together.
Yeah, this is a tool that I really like, event storming. I especially like it when it's like physically in the same room without laptops. That's the best way. It's a tool which you can use to have the same communication and to understand the user flow that's coming up. So what you're doing, you get out the sticky notes and a whiteboard, and you start first with the orange notes. The orange notes are the events, and the events are mostly written in the past tense because they did happen. So you start, if you're facilitating, it's easier to take a sticky note and have a start point and an end point, but from there you let go. You just let everybody that's participating write down the events that they think that will happen during those two start and end points. They don't need to have to be in order at that time. You need to brainstorm and also go for the outliners, for the weird ideas, because maybe in the weird ideas there's a great possibility, or you would trigger a mind thought for somebody else. So it's really like a brainstorming session with a little bit more context. Whenever you've done that, you can order it into the right chronological order. Then you can add some comments to it. So how did that event happen? You add that to it. Then who triggered it? Was it a person? Was it maybe a time-based event? Was it an email? Can be anything. And you have some conditions, maybe based on that event, you go up or down. And last but not least, once you're done, when you feel as a team, we have mapped out the entire user flow, then you will add the domains to it. Because a user, let's look at the user entity. A user in the first part of the user flow can have maybe a name and a date of birth, where that is enough, but the user in the second part of the user flow maybe also needs an address and some IBAN account or anything. So we're talking about a user, but the user in domain A is a different user than the user in domain B. This is not an event storming session, so if you want to dive in more, I really recommend you to do it, but it's just a tool to get to a common way or collaborative way of working. So this is what it can look like in practice.
Yes, and so if you use certain tools, you come into this tree where you have the opportunity, or you have, first of all, your journeys, where you have discovered all your opportunities. You have looked together at what the solutions are that you want to validate and maybe even build once they're validated. And then you go into the next phase of the design cycle, and that is to actually start designing. So usually we make first sketches or wireframes, and then we prototype that and we test it with the users. And once we've done this, we know exactly which direction we want to go in. We know exactly what is actually the solution that we want to build and put live. But before we immediately dive into, creating those tickets and start developing, one of the things that we said will really help from all the work that you've done so far is to map that down in a blueprint. It's like you don't go building a house without knowing exactly where the bathroom and the living room is going to be, right? You need a blueprint for that. And that's exactly the same thing here. And this is, again, where we come co-create, because you can see again the parts of the customer journey there on top with the user actions, and then you can say, okay, what are actually the front stage and backstage actions that need to be built or can be used? Maybe they're already there. And once you start mapping this out, you can also see that you shouldn't put something live before another team is finished. So it can be a completely different team, right? It can be one of those operational teams that you're depending on.
Yeah.
So it's always good to make this blueprint before you start working. Because once you have this blueprint, then we can continue the cycle. So we have the journey, we have the opportunities, you have your solutions, including the status of your solutions. I really, really want to say to everyone that has been my biggest learning, keep up the status of your solutions, because we all know if you work for a company for a longer time, after 2 years, and the new person is going to come in and say, I have a great idea. And you're like, we tried that. I don't remember. What happened with that? Yeah. Oh, no. And if you keep track of it and you make notes and you say, okay, we actually cannot do this right now because maybe the technology is not ready, or maybe the users are not ready. And then you can look at, has the market changed? Do we have this technology now? Is there something new? And if there is, you can say to the new person, great idea, we're going to try this now. And we actually already validated it because we knew users wanted it, but the market wasn't ready. Now the market is ready, now we're going to build this. So keep track of that, because that will, in the long run, make a big change for your company.
Cool.
And now
So we can
have
start building?
Now you can start building,
Yes.
Simone.
Nice, cool. Let's go into the build cycle, the dev cycle. Yeah, building, a lot of fun, but most of the time we just start, right? Like we start building. We have a use story. We maybe hopefully have some requirements, and we just dive in. And what do we do after we're finished? Then we create the designs to make it very fitting. But I would recommend to already do this upfront. Like, of course, everybody tells you in theory, but also from a point of collaboration, because this is the part where design can still validate if the approach that we think of is actually in line with what they thought of. So the first tool that you can use is, of course, a process flow. It's pretty well known. It looks a little bit like the event storming session, but this process flow has a little bit more depth. It's a little bit more like you can also add your databases in it, or when an email is being sent out, or an interaction with the external third party, something like that. So it's a little bit more in depth. Why I would recommend to still have the event storming and don't choose one of them is because the process flow most of the time is being done by one person. And then after like the idea, the user story is most of the time already there. They just create their vision of that user story they created, and maybe if you're lucky, some of the teammates will validate it, but there's no real brainstorming. There's no brainstorm time, right? There's no time to really go outside of the box and really think of, okay, what is possible? So that's nice. Secondly, we have sequence diagrams. How many do know sequence diagrams? Okay, nice. How many of you do use it? Okay, okay, great, cool.
And how many of you share it with your designer?
Hey,
No hands, no hands.
Nice, good question. Cool. Yeah, this looks very technical, and I can imagine that you don't really think of sharing this with your designer. I started doing this recently, I think in the last half a year, and it has have great results because designers are quite visual, and they do kind of get this. So it's actually quite great, because on the top you have the different actors, whereas if you don't show it, for them it's just that black box, the back end. It's like, okay, we have a front end, and then it goes to back end, and then we get something back. But actually, like, there are a lot of actors in the flow, and each actor comes with its own risks, right? Every actor can have different errors, can have different issues. And when we show it to them, we can also think of different flows that you want to anticipate on according like the error flows, for example. So if we zoom in a little, in this example, I could have drawn out my sequence diagram, and maybe I have a confirmation button whenever somebody wants to order, and I get a pop-up saying like, do you want to confirm your order? And maybe we didn't even talk about it. Maybe I just fill it in. Then this is the moment that design can say, no, you should not return to the basket, you should return to the home page or anything else. Other thing is that I might have thought, okay, when I get an error of a third party, I just give it back to front end, and then you just get that nice error page, that very generic error page that you get. But maybe...
No.
No?
No.
But maybe design things of a way where we can actually have that error flow on the back end, but without a user knowing. So maybe we can just show another page that like a user has no idea that he actually went into an error lane, but you can only know this and anticipate on this when talking. These are the gaps I talked about in the beginning, because this is something that you don't think of immediately, and we don't know the solution to it, but whenever you show the flows, it might become more tangible. And you can also see a little bit better the gaps. Like, okay, I just don't know as a designer or as a developer what you want me to do here. All right, last but not least for the tools, so more communication tools that you can use with your designer is the entity diagrams. It's about your data structure. Also something that's most of the time being used just as developers, maybe with your data architect. But I would also recommend it to show it to the designers, because more and more data gets important. It's so important that we don't save data that we don't use, because we're getting vulnerable of them, right? And by showing design, like, okay, I am now saving this information of this entity, then design can challenge that and say, okay, do we really need that data? Do we really need somebody's gender? Do we really need somebody's date of birth? I'm just saying some stuff. And you can minimalize that and create a more safe product also for your users. So then we can really start building. And of course, we don't do that by going into our submarine and going under and never going up. Whenever during the building process, I think we all know stuff changes because you're diving into the code and some stuff is not possible. Things are different than you're anticipating. You go back to your designer, you talk to them, you change your models to it. And then at some point, it's ready to test.
Yeah, and here you can really co-create again with your designers, test that. Of course, you want to do the testing if everything works correctly.
Sure. Yeah, the functionality can be our part, right? Yeah. C, or your QA part, like see if it really functions just the way you wanted it to, but the end result can still be tested by design, right?
Yeah, go through the user flow, go through that journey yourself, test it before you put it out there, and
ship it.
A lot of times you also see different things, right?
Sure.
A lot of times I see if a font is incorrect, you know, or the pixels are a bit off. That's not bad, right? The thing works, but it can be better, right? We can go to that point of delight that we can increase if we do that.
Yeah, cool. So we assume everybody's happy and we're ready to go to production. And then again, there's a point where it gets quite essential, because the DevOps cycle is something that started becoming popular in the last couple of years. And most of us ended up in the cycle by being a developer, and then we got told, okay, you're now also going to do operations, and you're now also going to do the maintaining it and the monitoring part of it. And I think most of the time, we just do it on the sides if we're lucky. Whereas if we really start working together, then we can also think of, okay, can we maybe create A/B testing, or can we?
Yeah, here what I always love to do is if we can send it out for A/B testing, but also to a specific target audience, because then you can keep it small and you can even learn faster. So for instance, if you have an app, a certain app, you can only send it out to your own employees and just ask them to use it. And just, you know, see what comes out of it.
Yeah.
Get the feedback, learn from that. Yeah. And improve before you put it out there to the entire world. Or what we do is we test it in one store, for instance, because then we also learn fast.
Yeah. And how many of you do have, if you're working DevOps, of course, but how many of you do have a dedicated user story or task to implement the monitoring of the new features that you're going to use? Very few, right? Yeah, I see also some like, if I would be in the room, I would also be like, yeah, kind of. Maybe like a subtask somewhere, like create dashboards or something. And then you have one search and that's pretty much okay. But this is the moment where you like, if you would take this more into account, if you would really take this as your responsibility, then you can really create a better product for your user, because then you know what you're talking about. And the monitoring is not black and white. It's not only for developers or only for design. If you take your requirements out and you see, okay, why did we want to build this feature? And what were the user requirements to it? Maybe we can put monitoring on that to see if we're actually fulfilling that intent. But also you can look at like, okay, can we already think of certain monitor to get information for a future cycle, for example?
Yeah, and what we do is we should do that together, because from a design point of view, you know, we look at it through the lens of the user, but probably we look at the same data, maybe with a different mindset, but still we look at the same data. And from here we learn, and again my tip, do journey management with that. So you've mapped out those journeys, you saw the pain points and the delighters. Now all these learnings that you have here, map them also in those journeys. So not only map opportunities and solutions towards those opportunities, but also map your current solutions and how they are performing. And you will learn a lot from that.
Cool. Well, with that being said, we're almost at the end. Here we have some key takeaways of what we just talked about. So first of all, look at your team and your team structure. Look at why they are in your company. What should they deliver? Why should they deliver what they do, and which persons belong to that? Secondly, incorporate the design cycle in your development cycle, at least, if that works for your team structure, of course. But really see it as a co-creation instead of two different entities. The responsibilities. So end product is of the whole team. It's from everybody that's working in that triangle. But you still have responsibilities that belong to your own discipline. And in that you need to trust. You need to trust your team members and to really empower everybody. Of course, it's hard because we all have a different background. Software developers have a very different vocabulary than designers. That's very true. And therefore, it's so important to find a tool that works for your team. Probably you will not find it in the first iteration. For me, we iterate on it every sprint. And I'm not saying that every sprint we changed our tactics, but we are challenging each other, like, can this be better? Or we still fall in the trick where we start a refinement without any visuals, and the designers are like, I thought we agreed that we would talk more with visuals. So everybody makes mistakes, but find out what works for your team. And give proper attention to your operation cycle. Really see where you can collaborate and where you can make a future improvement for your user to get your product out there. These are the tips and resources of today, what we used. Simon Sinek is on top. It's the book that Thamar referenced. And with that, we really want to thank you. Here's the slide share. You can follow us on Twitter and on Mastodon. Thank you. I have, at the moment, 0 followers, so please follow me. 2, oh yes. Cool. With that being said, we want to thank you a lot. And if you have any questions, let us know.
Yes. Thank you.
Oh.